1453, a single city revealed the truth that would change the world. Power no longer belonged to the once unbreakable walls, but to what tore them down.
The fall of Constantinople revolutionized siege warfare, spread fear across Western Europe, and forced major reforms in military defenses. Since 400 AD, Constantinople stood as the cultural, economic, and strategic bridge between Europe and Asia, overseeing the movement of goods, ideas, and armies between the two continents. This made Constantinople one of the most powerful and influential cities in the world at the time. By controlling key land areas and sea routes, the city shaped international trade, spread religious and scientific ideas, and determined movements of armies between Europe and Asia. Whoever possessed Constantinople had the power to change global politics, economics, and cultural exchange.
On April 6, 1453, Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II, the leader of the neighboring Ottoman Empire, challenged the undefeated city Constantinople. Feeling the pressure of holding the throne, he was determined to own a reputation as a strong and capable ruler.
And it was absolutely critical for a sultan in the Ottoman system to legitimize his rule by a new conquest. And this both showed that he had power, but also it meant that conquest usually meant that you had stuff that you had gained from the conquest. It would be dangerous for him to have failed to have taken the city. There would have been possibly a revolt from the army, and possibly he could have been murdered by the lords around him.
And we know that he was under intense pressure. In other words, the logistical costs of this operation were enormous.
He invested in artillery and carefully planned siege tactics possible of overcoming the city's legendary defenses.
At the time, the Theodosian walls surrounding Constantinople stood as one of the greatest defensive systems ever built. The structures stretched for 4 miles and were constructed of 3 layers: a 65-foot moat, an outer wall 26 feet high, and a massive inner wall 15 feet thick and 45 feet tall. By the 1400s, the Byzantine Empire had been reduced to little more than the city of Constantinople itself. The empire faced a huge economic crisis from losing land essential for agriculture and military pressure from surrounding powers. As a major center of trade between Europe and Asia, the city was valuable and vulnerable, making it a desired prize for the Ottoman Empire.
For decades, the Ottomans had repeatedly besieged the Byzantines but had failed every single time. Prior to the final siege, their attempts relied on the traditional medieval weapons: battering rams to smash gates, catapults to hurl stones over the walls, and spears and crossbows to fight the defenders. Despite their efforts, these methods of attack were ineffective and proved that the Byzantine walls were nearly impregnable. If the Ottomans wanted to take over the city, something needed to change.
In 1452, Sultan Mehmed II hired a Hungarian engineer known as Orban to construct enormous bronze cannons, including the famous one known as the Basilica. These weapons ranged from 10 to 27 feet long and weighed up to 19 tons. Capable of firing 1,000-pound cannonballs over a mile, they could smash through any medieval wall. Unlike earlier cannons, which often malfunctioned and were inconsistent, Orban's new innovation was both larger and far more reliable.
When the siege began, Mehmed II surrounded Constantinople with a large Ottoman army to cut off the city from all land and sea access, preventing supplies and reinforcements from reaching the Byzantines. As the army moved closer, Ottoman engineers built trenches and artillery platforms to protect their troops and move their cannons closer to the walls.
For the next 7 weeks, they kept constant pressure by relentlessly firing their cannons day and night, collapsing towers and carving gaps in the Theodosian walls faster than the Byzantines could repair them.
There were mounds of rubble, and the defenders were basically creating these patchwork palisades with, wooden beams and the rubble in order to create a kind of simulacrum of the walls.
Eventually, entire sections of the outer wall crumbled, and the growing damage made it impossible for the Byzantines to hold down the city's defenses. During the siege, the Byzantines sealed their harbor with the Chain of the Golden Horn, a huge iron barrier strung across the water. Knowing the harbor walls were unprotected, Mehmed II rolled ships over land on greased logs and launched a secret attack. By morning, 70 ships from the Ottoman fleet were attacking the harbor walls. This tactic forced the outnumbered Byzantine soldiers to defend the more insignificant walls, spreading them thin and weakening their overall defense.
He forced them to station people away from the critical area of the land walls. This reduced the number of defenders at the critical point. And he threw everything that he had at that critical point.
On May 29th, after weeks of cannon fire and continuous assaults, the Ottomans launched their final attack on Constantinople. Their strong walls were now weakened and breached by the artillery, no longer able to hold back their army. Ottoman soldiers rushed through the gaps in the Theodosian walls and into the city, overwhelming the Byzantine defenders. By the end of the day, Constantinople had been pillaged and ruined, marking the end of the Byzantine Empire.
News of the Byzantines' fall spread quickly and was exaggerated in letters, describing the Ottomans as unstoppable. The decimation and fall of Constantinople left people across Europe in panic and terror. Walls that were once known as indestructible crumbled to massive cannons in less than 2 months. Powerful cities like Venice, Florence, and Milan, with similar medieval technology, feared they would be next. Scared, European states ran to reform their defenses before they were attacked.
This was a particular moment when the Ottomans were able to put more guns into the field than anybody had ever had before. Effectively, it changed both siege warfare and open battle tactics. If you think of castles up till that point had quite thin, tall walls to stop people scaling, climbing into a castle. These were incredibly vulnerable once you start having gunpowder weapons. They were obsolete. So what you see is a revolution in fortress architecture.
Engineers adapted to the increasing demand of cannon-proof defenses by replacing tall medieval walls with star-shaped forts called bastions. These fortifications were first developed in Italy and then refined across Europe, particularly in France under an engineer named Vauban, who designed over 300 bastions. These structures dispersed and deflected the impact of cannon fire and provided further defense for cities and military forts.
The capture of Constantinople allowed the Ottomans control over many trade routes, including key sections of the Silk Road, strengthening their economic and political influence. The fall of Constantinople not only shifted the balance of power, but also highlighted the importance of innovation. Over time, the siege permanently transformed warfare, creating a cycle between weapons and defenses. Fortifications were redesigned and became lower and shorter, and cannons made smaller and easier to transport. As artillery grew in power, cities were forced to reform their walls, forts, and tactics to survive. This pattern led to new forms of protection and then back to even more advanced weapons that is still repeated today in the constant development of technology. The fall of Constantinople illustrates how revolution, reaction, and reform shape history. The revolutionary use of gunpowder cannons destroyed the belief that any wall was invincible. Europe reacted with fear and urgency to reform their defenses. What began as a single siege ultimately changed warfare for centuries to come.